The dragon hated the sound of breathing. Not loud breathing. Not the heavy, anxious kind that every new visitor brought into the sanctuary. Just breathing. The small, steady pull of air through a set of lungs that was not its own. Soreth could hear it all. The wet edge of each inhale. The faint whistle at the back of every exhale. And it made the little dragon's ear fins clamp flat against its golden skull until the ache behind its eyes became something closer to fire. The sanctuary sat at the base of a ridge on the planet Dravith, where the ground was warm from deep heat and the crystal trees rang softly when the wind moved through them. It was a quiet place, or it had been, before the parade of visitors began. Davin Relk, the old Dravithian keeper of the sanctuary, stood in the outer corridor and looked at the damage. 3 noise-dampening crystals shattered. A wall panel cracked from a tail strike. The soft moss flooring near the entrance scorched in a near-perfect circle where Soreth had breathed out hard enough to heat the air. The Korath envoy had lasted 6 minutes. He had come with good intentions, a formal greeting chant, and a voice that carried a low subsonic rumble his species used as a sign of respect. Soreth had responded by driving him backward through the gate at speed. The Vel delegate before him had lasted 4 minutes. The Marin delegation, 3 of them, singing together in harmonized welcome, had lasted less than 2. Davin Relk was running out of walls. He was also running out of time. 90 days was the window. After that, an unbonded hatchling passed into the care of the Galactic Collective, which meant a research facility on a cold station somewhere at the edge of mapped space. Davin had seen those facilities. They were clean, professional, and completely wrong for a creature that felt sound the way Soreth did. He had 41 days left. The arrival report for the new human researcher had been sitting on his desk for a week. Oren Vale, linguist, cultural observer, assigned to Dravith to study non-verbal communication among the Ridge communities. Nothing to do with dragons, nothing to do with the sanctuary. Davin had barely glanced at it. He glanced at it again now. Linguist, someone who studied how things spoke to each other. Someone who, by the nature of that work, also had to study how things listened. Davin folded the report and walked to the outer gate. Oren Vale arrived on foot, which was unusual. Most visitors to Dravith's surface came by transit pod. This one had walked the ridge path from the station landing, which took 40 minutes and required stepping over 3 thermal vents and 1 particularly territorial route crawler. The human was slightly dusty, carrying a travel pack and a data pad, and was looking up at the crystal canopy with an expression that was not awe exactly, more like careful attention, the look of someone filing things away. Davin said, "You are the linguist." Oren looked at him. "Yes, Oren Vale. I was told to report to the sanctuary for my initial orientation." "Your orientation can wait. I need to show you something first." They stood at the observation window. Beyond the reinforced panel, Soreth was curled in the far corner of the chamber, a tight, defensive coil of golden amber scales and pale blue undermarkings, tail wrapped close, ear fins pressed flat. The hatchling was the size of a large hunting animal and looked, even at rest, like something barely holding itself together. "Voice ache," Davin said quietly, "a rare condition in young dragons. Every sound above a certain threshold, or with an unfamiliar frequency pattern, causes pain. Not discomfort. Pain. The ear fins swell. The pressure builds behind the eyes." He paused. "The hatchling has driven away 7 keeper candidates from 5 species." Oren was quiet for a moment, watching Soreth through the glass. What does a keeper candidate usually do when they enter? Greet the hatchling. Speak to it. Offer a bonding phrase in their species tradition. So they come in and immediately start making noise. Davin looked at the human. "Yes." Oren said nothing for a few seconds, still watching Soreth. The hatchling had one eye open now, aimed at the glass, at them, tracking. "I'm not a keeper," Oren said. "I study languages, not dragons." "I know what you are," Davin said. "And I am asking you because every keeper I have brought here already knew what they were. They came in certain. They came in with a plan." He looked through the glass at Soreth. "Perhaps what this hatchling needs is someone who comes in with a question instead." Oren turned to look at him. The data pad was still in one hand. The other hand had found the strap of the travel pack without seeming to notice. "I won't promise anything," Oren said. "I am not asking for a promise," Davin said. "I am asking you to go in and sit down." Oren looked back at Soreth. The golden eye behind the glass was still watching, still sharp, still hurting, in a way that was visible even through 2 layers of reinforced material. "All right," Oren said. Davin opened the gate. Nobody had ever walked into Sorith's chamber and then just sat down on the floor. The hatchling watched the human do it from across the room. Oren Vale crossed to a spot near the inner wall. Not close, not by the entrance, not in the center where keeper candidates liked to stand so the hatchling could see them fully, just a plain, unremarkable spot near the wall, and sat down cross-legged on the scorched moss floor. Then took out the data pad and started writing. Sorith did not move. The human did not speak. A minute passed, then another. Oren's hand moved steadily across the data pad with a soft stylus. Scratch, scratch, pause, scratch, in a rhythm so slow and even it almost blended with the low hum of the thermal vents in the walls. No greeting, no harmonized welcome chant, no formal bonding phrase offered in 3 registers of a species language Sorith had never asked to hear. Just that small, steady scratching sound. Sorith's ear fins, which had been pressed tight since the gate opened, lifted slightly. Not all the way, but slightly. Day 1 ended like that. Oren wrote for about an hour and then left. Said nothing on the way out. Day 2 was the same. Oren came back, sat in the same spot, wrote for an hour. Sorith spent the first 20 minutes in the corner watching. Spent the last 40 minutes in a slightly less tight coil, still watching, but with both eyes open and the ear fins no longer pressed fully flat. In the notes on day 2, Oren wrote, "Subject does not respond to silence the way it responds to sound. When sound is present, even soft sound, all muscle groups visibly tighten. Ear fins compress. When the room is quiet except for the stylus, muscle groups slowly release. This is not trust. This is the absence of pain. Important distinction. Don't get ahead of yourself." On day 2, Oren also reviewed the records from all 7 previous keeper candidates. The notes were not comforting. The Korath representative had used a subsonic greeting rumble, standard respect gesture in his culture, carrier frequency around 18 Hz, too low for most species to consciously register, but sitting right at the edge of the range that activated Sorith's ear fin nerves. The Vel delegate had used bioluminescent clicking with a high-frequency hum underneath it, which she probably hadn't even known she was making. The Marin delegation had sung. All of them had assumed their own comfort with sound was the starting point. Oren wrote, none of them were wrong to try what they knew. They just didn't stop to find out what Sorith could receive without it hurting. Communication is not only about what you send. It's also about what the other side can actually hold. Day 3. Same spot. Same rhythm. About 40 minutes in, Sorith moved. Not toward Oren. Not dramatically. Just shifted position. Uncurled slightly, stretched one foreleg out, settled again closer to the middle of the chamber instead of packed into the back corner. Still watching. Still wary. But occupying more of the room. Oren noticed. Did not react. Kept writing. Then something happened that Oren did not plan and did not notice doing until it was already happening. The data pad had pulled up a long sequence of archived communication records, dense, dry material that required a kind of focused, patient attention. And in that focus, without thinking, Oren started to hum. For notes. Low. Slow. The same 4 in order. Then again. Not a real song. Not anything intentional. Just the thing Oren's throat did sometimes when the mind was working hard and the body needed something small and steady to hold on to. It was the kind of hum that came out of a person the way a heartbeat did, not performed, just present. Sorith went absolutely still. Not the freeze of fear. Not the locked-up stillness that came before an attack. Something different. The hatchling's head came up. The ear fins, both of them, all the way, spread open and forward like 2 cupped hands reaching toward a sound. Oren hummed the 4 notes again. Didn't realize yet what was happening. Sorith took 3 steps forward. The hatchling stopped about halfway across the chamber and stood there, ear fins fully open, golden eyes fixed on the human's face. Not on the hands, not on the data pad, but on the throat where the sound was coming from. The pale blue markings along Sorith's underside had gone very slightly brighter, the way they did, Davin had told Oren, when the hatchling was alert but not afraid. Oren looked up. Saw Sorith standing there. Realized the hum had stopped somewhere in the last few seconds. The chamber was quiet. Sorith stared at the human. The ear fins stayed open, waiting. Orin, very carefully, hummed the 4 notes again. Sorith closed its eyes for exactly 3 seconds, then opened them. The ear fins did not compress. The muscles did not tighten. The hatchling that had driven away 7 trained keeper candidates from 5 species stood in the middle of its chamber with its ear fins fully open and listened to a human hum 4 notes that meant nothing at all. Orin wrote 1 line in the notes before leaving that night. Something happened today. I don't know what it is yet. Find out. David Relk did not believe in coincidences. He had spent 60 years working with creatures who communicated in ways most of the galaxy refused to take seriously. And in that time, he had learned that things which looked like accidents were usually just patterns that nobody had looked at long enough. So when Orin described the 4 notes, their rough pitch, their slow spacing, the way Sorith had walked forward instead of away, David went to his archive room and did not come back for 2 hours. He came out holding a flat reading tablet and said, "Say the notes again." Orin hummed them, low to lower, a small dip, back up to the starting note. David closed his eyes, opened them, put the tablet on the table between them. On the screen was a Dravithian text, very old, written in a script that most of the collective's translation systems handled poorly. Brooding songs, David said. Parent dragons use them during the weeks before hatching. Low frequency, repetitive, always the same pattern, every night, so the young one inside the shell begins to know it before it has ever opened its eyes. He tapped the text. The pattern is not music in the way most species understand music. It is a frequency anchor. It tells the young dragon, the world outside has a sound. That sound is safe. You are known. You are expected. Orin stared at the screen. And my hum matches the base interval of the oldest recorded brooding pattern in our texts. David set the tablet down. Not exactly, but close enough that Sorith's nervous system recognized something in it. Something that said, I have heard this before. Before I had ears to hear with. Orin sat with that for a moment. Outside, through the sanctuary walls, the crystal trees were ringing in the evening wind. That's not possible, Orin said. I'm human. We evolved on a completely different planet. There is no reason our musical instincts should line up with Dravithian brooding biology. No, David agreed. And yet, Orin went back that night. Not during scheduled hours, just went back, alone, and sat outside the gate of Sorith's chamber in the corridor where the light was low and the thermal vents hummed distantly, and started humming. The 4 notes, steady and slow, over and over. On the other side of the gate, there was silence for almost a minute. Then Sorith pressed against it. Not attacking, just pressed against the gate, close as the hatchling could get, ear fins spread wide open, face turned toward the sound coming through the bars. Orin kept humming. This was how things were for the next 4 nights. Orin came after hours, sat in the corridor, hummed. Sorith pressed against the gate and listened. No words, no interaction beyond that, just the 4 notes, and the dragon on the other side of the bars with its ear fins open and its golden eyes half closed. On the 5th night, Orin added a 5th note. Just one more. A step below the 4th, held a beat longer than the rest. An extension. A question, almost, in the way a melody sometimes rises at the end to ask something it doesn't have words for. Sorith's ear fins snapped all the way forward. Then the hatchling made a sound. 1 note. Low, slightly uncertain, like something being offered carefully. Here, is this right? Is this what comes next? It was not language. It was not a word or a name or a formal thing of any kind. It was just a sound, and it sat in the air between them, and Orin's heart did something complicated. Orin hummed the note back. Sorith made it again, louder this time, more certain. They were halfway through this exchange, Orin offering, Sorith answering, the pattern growing by 1 small note at a time, when the corridor lights came on behind them and Rin Oslo walked in. Rin Oslo was Vel, which meant narrow shoulders, a pale bluish complexion, and the particular way that Vel bureaucrats had of looking at situations as though they were documents that needed filing. He was the Galactic Collective's assigned assessor for Dravith, and he was holding his own datapad and looking at Orin the way someone looks at a word they don't recognize in an otherwise familiar sentence. You are the human linguist, he said. Yes, Orin said quietly. It is past standard sanctuary hours. Yes. Rin Oslo looked through the gate at Sorith. The hatchling had pulled back, not far, not into the corner, but away from the gate, and was watching the new arrival with ear fins compressed. "I am here to conduct the 60-day assessment," Renaslo said. "The transfer window to the collective facility opens in 2 weeks if no bond is registered." He looked at Oren. "I was told there had been some progress. I have to be honest, a human researcher humming at a hatchling through a gate is not what I expected to find." "No," Oren agreed. "I don't imagine it is. Is there a bond?" Oren looked at Soreth. The hatchling's ear fins were still pressed down. But the golden eyes were not on Renaslo. They were on Oren. Steady, patient, waiting. "Not yet," Oren said. "Give me 2 weeks." Renaslo made a note on his pad. 2 weeks. Then I file my report, and the transfer proceeds." He left. The corridor lights followed him out and dimmed again. Oren turned back to the gate. Waited. Hummed the 4 notes. After a long moment, Soreth came back to the gate. Ear fins open again. 1 note offered. Quiet. Waiting to be answered. Oren answered it. By the end of the first week, the pattern had grown to 11 notes. Not all at once. 1 at a time, across 7 nights. Oren adding a note and Soreth either accepting it or replacing it with a slightly different one that seemed, to the hatchling, more correct. And this was the part that made Oren stop and stare at the wall of the research room for a long time. Soreth was editing the song. Not randomly. The changes had internal logic. When Oren added a note that jumped too far in pitch, Soreth would answer with a note that bridged the gap, as if the hatchling understood that the pattern needed to move in steps, not leaps. When Oren held a note too long, Soreth repeated it at the correct length. The hatchling was not just listening. The hatchling was teaching. Oren wrote in the log, "I came in here to observe communication. I did not expect to be its student." Dave and Relk, reading the log over Oren's shoulder the next morning, said nothing for a while. Then, in 400 years of recorded Dravithian history, no non-dragon has participated in tonal exchange with a hatchling. The texts say it is biologically exclusive, that only a dragon's nervous system produces the right signal. He paused. The texts may need updating. The gate had been opened on day 8. Davin had simply unlocked it without ceremony, and Oren had walked in and sat down in the middle of the chamber floor, and Soreth had walked over and sat down 3 body lengths away and started the tonal exchange from the beginning, as if to say, "Now we do this properly, without bars between us." The distance closed over the following days. Not because Oren pushed it, because Soreth chose it. On the far side of the building, Renaslo was working through his assessment files and finding that none of them had a category for what was happening in that chamber. He walked in on one of the sessions on day 10, stood in the doorway. Oren was sitting on the floor, eyes closed, humming. The pattern was long now, something that had a shape to it, something that started low and moved upward and then curled back. And Soreth was approximately 1 arm's length away with ear fins fully open, making answering sounds that fit into the gaps in Oren's melody the way water fits a crack in stone. Renaslo watched for 4 minutes, then left without speaking. In his own private log he wrote, "I don't have a classification for this. The hatchling shows no distress indicators. The human shows no bonding protocol compliance. And yet the interaction has characteristics of deep mutual communication in ways that I cannot formally define. I will need guidance from the review board." He did not share this with Oren. What Renaslo also did not know was that Oren had found the rest of the brooding song text, the part Davin hadn't mentioned on the first night, not because he was hiding it, but because he hadn't thought it would ever be relevant. The final stage of a brooding pattern was not tonal. It was verbal, not commands, not formal introductions, just a soft description of the world outside, what was waiting, what was safe, what a young dragon would find once it came out of the dark and into the open. The parent dragon would speak quietly, barely louder than a breath, and the words would carry on the same melodic structure as the tonal pattern that had come before. So the young dragon, hearing its parent's voice for the first time, would recognize it, would know that the voice was part of the same safe signal it had been hearing all along. Oren had been adding words for 3 nights, very quietly, 1 at a time. First, Soreth's name, hummed more than spoken, dropped into the pattern where a note would normally sit. No flinch. The ear fin stayed open. Then, the word for stars, in Dravithian, which Oren had learned from Davin. A 2-syllable word that sat low and soft. Sorith's ear fins pressed forward so hard they trembled slightly. Then, the word for wind. On the night before Rin Oslow's report was due, Orin sat in the chamber with Sorith and let the pattern unspool, all 11 notes. The melody that had been built one exchange at a time over 2 weeks, and at the end, spoke one full quiet sentence. A sentence about the crystal trees outside ringing in the evening. About the sky rivers of light that crossed Dravith after dark. About how they were gold and violet and moved slowly, like something breathing. Sorith had been still through all of it. Ear fins open, eyes half closed. When the sentence ended, the hatchling moved. Not suddenly, slowly, deliberate, step by step across the chamber floor, until Sorith was close enough that Orin could have touched the golden amber scales without leaning forward. Sorith lowered its head and pressed the broad brow ridge, the hardest, most armored part of a dragon's skull, the part they turned toward things they trusted, gently against Orin's hand. Orin did not move, did not make a sound. The brooding song text had a word for this moment. Davin had translated it roughly as, "The world outside is accepted." It meant the young dragon had decided the voice it heard was part of a safe place, that the sound and the world it described were real and worth coming out into. Orin sat on the floor of the chamber with Sorith's head against their hand and thought, "We almost sent this creature to a research facility. We almost did that." The thought sat heavy for a moment. Then Orin looked down at Sorith, golden scales warm under the sanctuary lights, pale blue markings bright with calm, and started humming again from the beginning. The first sign that something had changed was that the gate stood open. Not because anyone had unlocked it. Not because a session was scheduled. Dave and Relk came to check on the chamber in the early morning, 2 days before Rin Oslow's deadline, and found the gate standing open and the chamber empty, and Sorith walking calmly down the outer corridor beside Orinvale, as if this were a thing that had always happened. Davin stood very still. In 60 years at the sanctuary, he had never seen a hatchling leave its chamber willingly. They stayed in them, not because the gates were locked, but because the world outside was too loud and too full of unfamiliar frequencies, and the chamber was the one place that was known. Sorith had not left the chamber in the entire 42 days since hatching. Now the hatchling was walking down the corridor with its ear fins fully open, pausing occasionally to examine something in the wall or the floor, and then looking back at Orin the way a young creature looks at whoever it's decided is the fixed point of its world. Orin saw Davin and said, simply, Sorith wanted to come out. Davin looked at the hatchling. The hatchling looked at Davin, assessed him for a moment, decided he was acceptable, and went back to examining a crack in the wall stone. "How do you know?" Davin asked. "Walked to the gate," Orin said. "Looked at it. Looked at me. Waited. That's it. That's it." Davin sat down on the corridor bench. He did not say anything for a while. Outside, through the high window slits, the twin moons of Dravith were still visible above the ridge line, pale against the lightning sky. "I have to tell you," he said eventually, "that this has never happened. Not in any record I have." "I know," Orin said. "The collective will want to categorize it." "I know that too." Sorith came back from the wall and leaned briefly against Orin's side. Not hard, just the slow press of a warm golden shoulder, and then lay down on the corridor floor and yawned with a great deal of small needle teeth. Davin watched this and said, "What did you do?" Orin thought about it honestly. "I listened first. Then I let the sound come from a place it could recognize. I didn't try to speak to Sorith in a language I already knew. I let Sorith show me what it could receive." A pause. "And I hummed. That part was an accident." The paperwork arrived that afternoon. Rin Oslo walked into the sanctuary with his datapad and a senior collective assessor on a live link, and stood in the outer room and explained that while he had personally witnessed what appeared to be a significant and unusual interaction, the collective's bonding registry had no category that applied to the current situation. No training protocol was followed, he said. No species-appropriate bonding ceremony was conducted. The keeper candidate, if we are calling this person a keeper candidate, is not certified in any relevant field, and the interaction methodology has no precedent in any of our records. Orin was sitting on the floor of the outer room. Sorith was lying next to Orin with its head on Orin's knee, eyes half closed, and Orin's hand was resting very lightly on the top of the golden skull. Rin Oslo looked at this arrangement. "Is this," he said carefully, the bond. I don't know what you call it, Oren said. Soreth chose to come out of the chamber. Soreth chooses to be here. I didn't ask for that. I didn't do a ceremony. I just sat down and listened and then sang a song every night, and the hatchling decided, on its own, that the voice was safe. Oren looked up at him. You can call it what you need to. But Soreth is not going to a research facility. Rin Oslo's senior contact, over the live link, said, We are aware this situation is unusual. It is not unusual, Davin said from the doorway, in a tone that closed the conversation like a door. It is unprecedented. There is a difference. Unusual means it has happened rarely. Unprecedented means the collective's categories did not predict it. That is a problem with the categories, not with the bond. Silence on the line. The senior contact said, The transfer will be held pending further review. Ren Oslo closed his datapad. He looked at Soreth for a long time. The hatchling, without opening its eyes, breathed out slowly. A long, warm exhale that smelled faintly of heat and old stone and something almost sweet, and pressed slightly closer to Oren. I want it noted, Ren Oslo said quietly, to no one in particular, that I do not understand what I watched happen here. And I want it noted even more that I think the collective should study it. He left. That evening, Oren took Soreth outside for the first time. They sat on the flat rock ledge at the edge of the sanctuary grounds, under the open Dravith sky. The sky rivers moved overhead, those long luminous arcs of gas that drifted between the stars, gold and violet and slow, like something too large and too old to be in a hurry. Soreth watched them, ear fins wide open, scales catching the light. Oren started to sing. The full pattern now, all 11 notes grown into something longer, something with a shape that neither of them had designed alone. Words threaded through it at the ends of phrases. About the light above them, about the wind off the ridge, about the crystal trees that rang when the evening came. Soreth listened, and then, quietly, hummed the answer. 3 months after the night Soreth first walked out of the chamber, a Marin scholar named Belroth published a paper that broke 11 download records in the Galactic Collective's academic network within its first week. The title was long and precise in the way academic titles tend to be. What it said, stripped of its careful language, was this: Human lullabies and Dravithian dragon brooding songs share the same structural bones. Low tone, slow tempo, repetition, a descending melodic phrase at the end that curls back on itself like a question being gently answered. Humans evolved this to settle frightened infants. Dragons evolved it to reassure young ones in the dark before they had even opened their eyes. 2 species on opposite ends of mapped space, arriving at the same solution to the same problem. The paper cited Orenvale's field notes extensively. Belroth had asked permission first. Oren had said yes, and then sat quietly for a while, and then said, I wonder how many other things we've been singing at each other across species lines without knowing it. Belroth hadn't had an answer, but 11,000 researchers across 40 species apparently wanted to find one, because that was how many had downloaded the paper by the end of the second week. On Dravith, Soreth was growing. Not fast, not alarmingly, just steadily, the way young dragons do when they are calm and well and not spending all their energy on fear. The hatchling was now the size of a medium cargo transport, which sounds large and was large, but somehow managed to seem smaller than that when lying across the sanctuary's outer ledge in the afternoon heat, eyes half closed, watching the ridge with the comfortable patience of a creature that had decided the world was acceptable. The gold and amber scales had deepened in color. The pale blue undermarkings had brightened, which Davin said meant the nervous system was settling. The voice ache had not disappeared, but it had reduced, because Soreth had learned to ask for quiet when the pressure built, and Oren had learned to read the signs well before it reached that point. Loud visitors still caused problems. A trade delegation from the Korath Dominion had arrived 3 weeks prior, and the lead envoy had made the mistake of opening with his species' standard subsonic greeting rumble. Soreth had appeared from the far side of the courtyard at a trot, which was more alarming than it sounds when something that size moves with purpose. No one was hurt. The envoy spent the rest of the visit communicating through written text, which he later admitted was actually more efficient. The collective's review board completed its formal assessment on a gray morning in the second month. The ruling was read aloud by Ren Oslo, who had, somewhat to everyone's surprise, volunteered to deliver it in person rather than send it by link. He stood in the sanctuary's outer hall with his datapad and read the ruling in the careful flat tone vel officials used for formal occasions, and at the end of it he set the pad down and said, in a different tone entirely, "I would like to add, off the record, that this is the most sensible outcome of a deeply confusing 3 months." The bond between Oren Vale and Soreth was officially registered under a newly created category, Instinctual Resonance Bond. The ruling noted that no training protocol, keeper certification, or diplomatic credential had produced the outcome. It noted that the bond appeared stable, mutual, and initiated entirely by the hatchling. It noted that the methodology, if it could be called that, consisted of silence, patience, a researcher's habit of careful listening, and a 4-note hum that a human produced without thinking. The ruling also included a line that Davin read 3 times before he believed it was real. The review board recommends that cross-species tonal communication be formally incorporated into collective keeper training curricula, beginning with the study of instinctual shared structures between human vocal music and Dravithian brooding biology. Davin read it a 4th time, then went to find a cup of hot drink and stood in his archive room surrounded by 400 years of records and thought about the fact that a human linguist had accidentally done, in 2 weeks, what those 400 years of trained keepers had not. Oren was not thinking about any of this. Oren was sitting on the flat rock ledge outside the sanctuary with Soreth curled around the left side, and the sky rivers moving overhead, and a small fire going, because Dravitha's nights still got cold even in the warm season. The song had changed since the beginning. It was longer now, much longer, and it had words throughout, not just at the edges. Words in Dravithian and words in Oren's own language and 2 words in a 3rd language Oren had picked up from Davin's archive texts. Words that had no good translation but sounded, even to Oren, like safety. It was not a composed thing. It had not been written or planned. It had grown the way things grow when 2 different creatures spend enough nights in the same place listening to each other. It had Oren's voice and Soretha's harmonic underneath and the rhythm of the crystal trees ringing faintly in the wind beyond the ridge. Oren sang it now, in the firelight, under the sky rivers. Soretha's great golden head was resting against Oren's shoulder. The ear fins were wide open. The pale blue markings on the underside glowed faintly in the dark. At the 1st note, Soreth hummed, low and steady, holding the root tone while Oren built above it. The way they always did now. The way it had always been, since a hatchling in pain had heard 4 notes through a gate and walked toward them instead of away. Somewhere in the collective's data network, 11,000 researchers were asking what else the galaxy had been singing without knowing it. On a warm rock on Dravith, the answer was playing itself out, 1 note at a time, in the dark.